right, welcome back, everyone. After an invigorating morning of whale vowels and plant chatter, we're excited and honored to have Kerry Dunleavy from Conservation Metrics, representing the organization and sharing on bioacoustics and machine learning. So take it away.
Great, thank you. So I'm Kerry Dunleavy. I'm a project manager at Conservation Metrics. My background is in marine mammal acoustics, and I've been with Conservation Metrics for 7 years now. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what we do in the greater ecosystem or acoustic ecosystem monitoring, as well as what we're doing in marine soundscape monitoring. So Conservation Metrics specializes in evidence-based monitoring for conservation. This essentially means when conservation measures and management actions are taken, it's hard to know if they're successful without analysis and measuring the outcomes. We do this primarily via acoustic monitoring. There's many advantages to acoustic monitoring. It's cost-effective, less invasive, repeatable, archivable, and scalable. And scalable means we can increase our statistical power when answering those conservation questions. We offer a variety of conservation services, endangered species recovery, ecosystem health monitoring, measuring outcomes of conservation measures, quantifying impacts, and detecting emerging threats. We have provided rare species detection for bats, birds, and frogs all over the world. As well as we have conducted acoustic surveys to measure the success of invasive species eradication. We have partnered a handful of times with Island Conservation. They're a group that eradicates invasive species from islands. And we measured these outcomes by monitoring for endemic populations before and after eradication measures, and hopefully see examples like in this graph where the call rates increased dramatically after eradication. We also leverage acoustic monitoring to quantify impacts. So a lot of our biggest projects are in Kauai. We've been working in Kauai for more than 10 years now. Hawaiian petrels and Newell shearwaters both breed on the island in big breeding aggregations in the summer, and they leave those breeding aggregations at night and often collide with power lines. This has caused the populations to plummet, and we've been monitoring the rates of collision as well as the activity at the breeding colonies for 10 years. This big project in Kauai is an example of why we need deep learning. You can see here between 2012 and 2017, we had a dramatic increase in gigabytes and hours of data collected. And I can tell you that has only continued to increase today. And it would be impossible for someone to go through all of those recordings looking for a very rare signal, like a bird hitting a power line, and be able to effectively do conservation with acoustics. All of the data that we have processed for bird strikes on Kauai have gone into a collision risk model. So this is a map of power lines on Kauai, and you can see, I guess it's kind of hard to see, but there are some red areas here and some yellow areas here where there's many more bird strikes. All of that has resulted in management actions being taken in the last 10 years, like putting some power lines underground and putting seabird deterrent measures on power lines themselves. And it has been a huge conservation success story. So this is the call rates at the breeding aggregations for Hawaiian petrels. This is one location we monitor called Upper Limahuli Preserve. We monitor a bunch of the aggregations there, and almost all of the colonies have graphs like this. In the last 10 years, a dramatic increase in call rates, and the populations have really started to come back with the conservation management actions. Acoustic monitoring also allows for rich, long season data, year-long data, as well as getting the activity of daily or nightly patterns of nocturnal species that we can't observe as easily. And we put all of that together to look at the phenology of species. So this is an example of a raster figure. I'm going to show you a handful of these today. It's essentially like a heat map. Date is along the x-axis, time is along the y-axis, and in this case, sunrise is at the top there. And the color in the graph represents the intensity of call rates. So this is ashy storm petrels. We monitor ashy storm petrels off the coast of California. And you can see almost like a tiger stripe shape in there. That's actually a seabird response to the full moon. So seabirds call a lot less during a full moon to avoid predators like gulls and rats that go after their chicks and eggs. And they call more during new moons, which is those bright periods there. We also are conducting continental scale monitoring with the North America Bat Monitoring Program. We started partnering with NABAT in 2019. NABAT is a USGS run program to do continental scale occupancy models for all species of bats in North America. We are processing a huge proportion of their data now. This year we did almost 1,600 locations, 10 different sensor types, 21 million files, and 26 terabytes of data. And really all of that is just to give you a picture of how we're using machine learning and acoustic monitoring to answer questions for managers on the ground. We process most of our data primarily in the cloud. We use Azure for storage, and we have our own cloud-based web app. This is an example of the web app. This is 2-second windows of humpback whale calls in Moorea. We can listen right in the app. We can expand the sound files and see more of them. We can save out clips, and we can label right on the windows. You can see in some of these, it's kind of hard to see, but these are all labeled as humpback already. We can change the spectrogram settings. And more importantly, we actually have set this all up to connect to R. So we can get all of the machine learning model probabilities for every 2-second window in a data set, read it into R, attach the field metadata, and then create data sets however we want. We can look at a certain time of night, a certain sensor, a certain season, or we can look at only the high probability calls or only the low probability calls, and we can randomly sample. It is so powerful, and it has allowed us to really do more efficient QA/QC and labeling, both for models and for projects for our clients. We can train machine learning models right in the cloud. We can train our own convolutional neural networks. This is an example of some early coral reef models we made with the model performance. And we also utilize both Perch and BirdNet in the cloud. This is an example of our workflow. So data comes in the mail or directly uploaded to the cloud from our clients. We do a bunch of QA/QC on it, make sure there's no duplicates and all the time zones are correct. And then we put it all into Azure. Once it's in Azure, we can directly run our own models or Perch or BirdNet, or we can start iteratively labeling and training our own machine learning models. Once we have decided that a model is working to the performance we want for whatever the conservation question is at hand, we can extract the event data. And what that means is we take all the 2-second windows of the focal class and we wrap them up into a call per minute metric. And once we have the call per minute metric, we can start looking at trends over time, comparisons between seasons, starting to do stats and other kinds of modeling on that data for our clients. Since 2020, we've been starting to work in the marine soundscape monitoring area. Our first project was an Ocean Kind funded project in partnership with Cornell. We created our first convolutional neural networks for coral reefs with that first contract. And we used data from Florida, Palmyra, and Hawaii to do that. Our coral reef models use transfer learning from the Google Perch model. Tom Denton, who's here, helped us with that. We also recently partnered with the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. We're going to start analyzing their sound trap data from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, as well as from American Samoa. This is an example of an early humpback whale detector we made for that data. You can see the whales show up in December and get get more and more activity until mid-March when the recording period ends. We are also working with ONMS to create an engine and boat detector. This is actually a very complicated question for us. As most of you might know, boats can sound really different. They can be really low frequency, they can be broadband, they sound totally different when they're close to the hydrophone or far away from it. They can have weird little squeaky sounds, they change sound when they're going faster or slower or turning. So our plan for this is to just really overtrain the model with tons and tons of data from tons and tons of different engines. Anything we can find, we're going to try and put it in there. And we're hopeful that we can be successful, but we're not positive. This is some preliminary examples of our current engine detector. And you can see there it's showing more activity in the daytime, but some interesting, weird 24-hour activity, and we definitely think there's some false positives in here still. Another really big project we're working on right now is in Moorea. This is also an OceanKind funded project, and it's in partnership with UC Santa Barbara, Oregon State University, and the Coral Gardeners. Moorea is an island next to Tahiti, and it has these interesting long-term ecological research locations all around it. There's 6 of them, and people have been doing various studies in those LTERs since the 1970s. Things like coral counts and fish counts and water samples. And we're really excited to be working down there. Last year, we were able to deploy both a hydrophone and a paired, both a hydromoth and a paired sound trap together in each one of the LTERs. And in conjunction, OSU is doing eDNA on the water samples, and UC Santa Barbara is doing fish counts and coral cover. Some of the bigger problems with the Moorea data right now is the absolute wealth of unknown fish sounds. It's pretty incredible. There are fish making noise at all times of day, at all sites, all the time. And we don't know what most of them are. It's been a challenge. But it's also really fun. There's some really weird sounds in there. We are labeling many of the sounds descriptively. So this is an example of a fish croak and a fish grunt and a fish whoop. These are labels we are just making up on the spot to try and keep track for ourselves. But there are a few signals we do know. So one of our main focal signals is damselfish. We have found 2 different call types of damselfish in this data. The one on the left there is a little higher frequency and a little more like a trill. And the one on the right is a little bit more low frequency. They have a very similar cadence though. And we don't know much more than that. We don't know if it's 2 different species of damselfish, if it's juveniles and adults, if it's more than 2 species or 1 species making 2 calls. We're not really sure. But on the left in the raster figure, you can see the signal is already looking interesting. A couple of those sites are showing really clear seasonal patterns that could be spawning aggregations. It's also, this figure is also kind of an example of how much we don't know about our models right now. We're not sure if some of those darker, quieter looking sites are not trained enough with our current machine learning model, or if they really don't have very many damselfish calls. And that'll be one of the things we're working on in the next few months. Our second focal species in Moorea is parrotfish. Parrotfish are indicators of reef health, and they are noisy. They eat coral and also scrape algae off of coral. And when they're doing that, they make this very distinctive crunching sound. And you can see the spectrogram there is an example of that. It's really easy to identify visually and orally. And our early model early model results are really promising. So this raster has hydromoths on the left and sound traps on the right. It's a really good example of the fact that our model is not generalized to both detectors yet. As you can see, our model is finding way more parrotfish crunching on the sound traps. We're not totally sure why. One of our next steps is to label a bunch more hydromoth parrotfish crunches and retrain the model and hope to see similar results with the sound traps. But we're not positive we can do that. One of our main goals is to get one model that can work on both sensor types and maybe others like ears and harps and things like that, but we're just not really there yet. The preliminary results for parrotfish, though, are awesome. They're crunching all the time in the daytime, which is what we would expect, And we think we're really going to be able to answer some interesting ecological questions with this class. Another class I'm going to talk about is called Fish Knock Chorus. This is a class that I made up. It is just almost constant knocking below a kilohertz. We don't know if it's many different kinds of fish, if it's one species making a ton of noise. It's often too much masking of other signals to really know what's going on there. It covers up other like grunts and croaks and things like that. And for the sheer sanity of labeling data for our model, I made a lumped class. Anytime there was too much knocking to decipher what was going on, I called it a knock chorus. Interestingly, though, it's already showing some interesting results. So it could be a bunch of species, or it could be one species that's really loud, but no matter what it is, it's showing some clear sunrise and sunset peaks. It's happening more at the nighttime. And we do think, even though like so much of this Maria data, we're not going to be able to label to species, we think we're going to be able to see some really cool ecological things with acoustics. And again, it's just another outline of how our models are not performing the same on both recorders, but we're going to try and sample more from sound traps with the hope of evening out the model performance. So I've already talked about some of the challenges in the marine monitoring areas for us. The unknown signal identification is one of our biggest ones. And kind of following right behind that is the naming conventions of unknown signals. It's really difficult to keep track of the 100 classes we've labeled, and we're making judgment calls when labeling on like what is the same and what is different. So if you see this signal called low knock, and maybe I call that a low knock, and an hour later I'm moving through and I come to this one and I'm like, well, that looks like a low knock, but there's a little bit of like a grunt in the middle. Is that the same? Is it different? We're not really sure. And I make judgment calls all day long about what we're lumping and what we're not. It's also become difficult to train new people. So if an analyst is coming in to help me label, it's really difficult to be like, well, here are the 100 signals and a lot of them are overlapping and you just have to kind of decide what they are. So I wanted to mostly present that to, if anyone in the room is dealing with unknown signal labeling and classification, we'd love to talk because we can improve for sure. We also really want to improve our machine learning models. We thought they were going to perform really similarly to our terrestrial models, and they haven't. We think it's probably differences in water or sound propagation underwater, snapping shrimp, currents, waves, things like that. We are hopeful. They do seem to be getting better over time, but they're just not really where we thought they would be at this point. And another challenge for us is putting everything into production. It's hard to get data from different clients and different recorders with different naming schemes and different soundscapes and have different species questions into one pipeline. But we think we can do it. We did it really successfully with terrestrial seabird models, and we did it really successfully with the NABAT project. And that is our big picture. One big pipeline for all of our marine projects. We want it to be able to handle big data. We want it to be repeatable, automated, and scalable. And we really want to be able to answer the long-term monitoring questions that managers have about their areas. So we're really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I do have time for questions, and my colleague Abram is here. He can help answer questions too.
Excellent. Thank you, Kerry. Any questions?
I have two. And so the sound trap and the hydromoth are like dramatically different sensors. So I guess I just don't understand how I guess I don't understand how you're going to rectify that. Like, I mean,
we're hoping if we train the model with enough examples from each one, that the performance will even out.
Right, because
but
you'll have
we-
double labeled on both.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we would have, like
Yeah.
1,000 parrotfish on each one and 1,000 damselfish on each one. We have not seen that yet, though. Like, we're not sure it's gonna work.
Right. This is a speculation question. Those bars at sunrise and sunset are dramatic.
Sorry, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think's going on?
that is the question. I have no idea. Does anyone I don't know enough about
Okay.
coral reef unknown fish sounds to understand it.
Yeah, it's just such a dramatic pattern. It's like you don't often come across stuff like that, so it's really cool. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's what's going to be really exciting about all of these projects is there's so much we don't know.
I think some of those patterns are really similar to what we see with birds, with dawn chorus, and also right before sunset, a lot of birds start talking. With coral reef fish, I think there's some, like on that bottom left figure panel, you can see there's like a sunrise thing that comes and goes each month or so. And so there's like a combination of a seasonal pattern and a diel pattern there. And it could be something to do with spawning or food driven. So like there's a lot of small organisms that might be coming or going from to like hide from the reef and all of a sudden be available to be consumed. But to me, it's just a sign that this data set is super rich and there's all sorts of questions like available to be asked of it.
Yeah. Is there a way you can go back to your slide that showed all the data you were getting?
From Kauai?
I mean, there was this thing where you're like, look, so much more data, more data, more data. Yeah,
Yeah.
That one. So to what extent is I'm a computer scientist. I understand that there's different sort of social norms around data in different fields. To what extent is stuff like this shareable? Do you guys have control of it? Does it belong to someone else and you're sort of processing it for them, but you can't share? Like, how does that work?
Most of it is not shareable, especially the strike project specifically is quite politically driven because of the birds dying. But we often have written into our contracts that we can like use the detections we find for like future model training. Right. Anything else, Abram?
I guess most of so we're a for-profit company, which is really different than most people in this room. And most of our projects are client projects. And so the data are shared with us they share the data with us. And so most of them are willing to share, especially if there's a researcher that wants to do something new and interesting on their data set for free. They're usually pretty open to sharing. And so like, yeah, it really depends on the organization we're working with. And most of the data sets we retain a copy of, but for some of them we can't, like as they grow, it's just too much data to store and pay for us to not have a plan to use.
Yeah, in addition to the noise of engines, one of the things that bothers me the most when recording for cetaceans, because of the frequency range, is all of the fish finders and sonars and the like. Okay, that keep interfering right up there in the frequency range of the dolphins. Are you making molds of those too, or can you?
I think we're going to start lower frequency. Most of these projects are more like fish oriented, which is below 2 kilohertz. But that's a great point. The echo sounders are really loud and also problematic. And maybe that could be like a future question that we look at.
Okay. And I have a second question regarding the hydromoths. So the hydromoths are 16-bit devices, and they have a microphone that has been criticized in many dimensions. Have you checked in your detections from the sound traps what is the decibel level at which they appear in your recordings, and whether they would be even audible at the level of because the sound trap can hear much further away. So it may be simply distance effect.
I have not looked at it. That's a good question though. I mean, the first like labeling of all of this data, it was so obvious that they were so completely different. And I hadn't thought about that until right now, but you're right. Those are even different questions. They have different like spheres of detection.
I might just throw a little more answer to Brian's question as well. So for birds and terrestrial recordings, I think things have been opening up quite a bit in terms of people being willing to share their data. And a really big factor in that is just getting more open data out there in the first place so that people aren't quite as precious about their particular data set. There's a number of data sets that are up on Zenodo that are fully annotated. We actually worked with Conservation Metrics to produce one of those data sets last year, I think. Really great. And then one of the other challenges there is like, yeah, the scale of the data. So like if you go to Zenodo, Zenodo will happily host up to 50 gigabytes of data. But you know, we're looking at 27 terabytes from 2017 there, right? It's it's just a different scale. And so when we go to the open data side, there's questions about like, okay, how do we scale this down such that people will actually be interested in downloading it in the first place? And then if you are really interested in working with the full, you know, 27 to 250 terabytes of data or whatever, then it becomes more of like, yeah, okay, get in touch and we can figure out how to transfer stuff around. But yeah, I think overall, like pushing to get more data open is helpful in getting even more data open in the long run. So folks working underwater, please help us.
Great talk. I guess my thinking about well, first I'd love to hear the sounds of you said that the one where they're all where there's a real cacophony. Do you have anybody in chance?
I can pull some up if anyone wants to listen. I didn't set it up in the presentation.
Okay, no, anyway, I was just curious because I wanted to hear, but also thinking about you know, all the it's sort of interesting to think that above this huge diversity of coral reef fishes, and we know that there's a lot of vocalizations going on, but do we know like how many at least in Maroa, how many species of fish can you identify acoustically? Is that, do you have no, not yet. But anyway, it seems like a cool thing to even just like really focus on a high resolution with like lots of triangulation of sounds and everything like that, considering there's probably a lot of talk over, you know, is the first step to start increasing that number. It reminded when there is like from the 60s or 70s from the US Navy has like an album out of acoustics underwater. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that, but I was also quite surprised at how few species there are. Well, we know of fish that are vocalizing, you know, there's like the midshipman fish, and there's a couple like really examples of ones that are very vocal and highly studied, but there's so many that haven't been. So yeah, I think it's really exciting to think of all the possibilities in fish bioacoustics and even going into the coral larvae and some of those early studies on you know, health of reef being determined by the soundscapes there. So anyway, really cool stuff. I think we will thank you. Really appreciate that, and we continue these conversations over lunch, which will be out in the courtyard. Thank you.